If you want everyone to laugh, just stand right there. Let them see exactly where you belong, Daniel Carter said, his voice smooth, controlled, carrying easily across the courtyard as glasses paused mid-air and conversations faded into a curious silence. The late afternoon sun stretching golden light across the polished stone and reflecting sharply off the still surface of the pool, turning everything brighter, sharper, harder to ignore, and there she was, Ava Johnson, standing exactly where. He pointed, near the curved edge where the water met the smooth stone, her posture straight, her hands resting calmly at her sides, her expression neither defiant nor submissive, just present, as if the moment belonged to something larger than the voices around her. While the guests began to shift slightly, their attention tightening, sensing something unusual beneath the surface of what was supposed to be casual entertainment, Daniel stepped closer, slow and deliberate, the faint smile on his face widening just enough to invite laughter without demanding it, the kind of expression that assumed agreement before it was earned. "Come on," he added lightly, gesturing toward the water with a relaxed flick of his hand. "Do not worry, it is just for fun." And a few quiet chuckles rose from the crowd, soft, uncertain, testing whether the moment was safe to enjoy. The breeze moved gently across the courtyard, brushing the surface of the pool into subtle ripples that caught the sunlight like broken glass, and Ava did not move, not forward, not back, her gaze steady, her breathing even, as if the air around her had slowed down while everything else continued at its usual pace. Daniel's shoes clicked softly against the stone as he closed the distance, stopping just a few feet away. His presence filling the space with expectation, with control, with the quiet assumption that this would unfold exactly as he intended. And still she remained, grounded, unshaken, the fabric of her uniform, catching the light in soft folds, simple, clean, without excess, a contrast to the tailored suits and flowing dresses surrounding her. Someone in the crowd lifted a phone slightly, then hesitated, lowering it again, unsure now whether this was something to capture or something to avoid, and Daniel noticed that hesitation, just for a second, a flicker crossing his expression before it disappeared behind practiced confidence. "See?" he said, turning slightly to the guests, as if including them in the moment, as if inviting them to share in it. "It is not that serious." But the words did not land the way he expected. They settled into the air without weight, without the easy response he was used to, and something shifted, subtle, almost invisible, but real, the kind of shift that does not announce itself. It simply changes how everything feels. Ava's eyes lifted just slightly, meeting his, not challenging, not avoiding, just meeting, and in that quiet connection, there was no fear, no urgency, only a calm that did not belong to the situation he was trying to create. The sunlight reflected again across the water, brighter now, almost blinding for a second, and Daniel adjusted his stance instinctively, one foot shifting closer to the edge, the smooth stone beneath him polished to a mirror-like finish, beautiful but unforgiving, and still the crowd watched, no longer amused, no longer relaxed, but attentive, fully present, as if something important had begun without anyone deciding it should, and Daniel laughed softly, a controlled sound, meant to reclaim the tone of the moment, meant to bring it back to something simple, something easy. But even that laugh felt thinner now, less certain, as if it had to pass through something heavier before it reached the air. "You are making this awkward?" he said, almost lightly, but not quite, and Ava did not respond, did not step away, did not step forward. She simply stood, steady as the light that stretched across the courtyard, and in that stillness, in that quiet refusal to become what he expected, something began to change, not loudly, not suddenly, but completely, as if the moment itself had chosen a different direction, and no one there could yet explain why. The silence did not break after his words, it settled deeper, as if the space itself had decided to listen more carefully, and Ava remained exactly where she was, not frozen, not hesitant, but steady in a way that did not ask permission from the moment or the people watching it unfold. The golden light continued to stretch across the courtyard, catching the fine edges of her uniform and softening the contrast between her and everything around her. And if anyone had been paying close enough attention, they would have noticed that her calm was not something she created in response to him. It was something she carried with her long before she stepped into that space, long before the invitation to stand near the pool had ever been spoken, long before Daniel Carter had even known her name, because Ava Johnson had learned, in places far removed from polished stone and curated gatherings, that not every moment required a reaction, and not every voice deserved one, and that truth lived quietly in the way she stood, in the way her shoulders remained relaxed, in the way her eyes did not search for approval or escape, but simply rested where they were, present and aware. Daniel shifted slightly again, almost unnoticeable, but enough to signal that something in the rhythm of the moment had slipped just beyond his control. He was used to movement following his lead, to energy bending toward his tone, to laughter arriving when he expected it. But here, now, the response was delayed, uneven, incomplete, and it created a space he did not know how to fill. The guests, still gathered in careful semicircles, were no longer leaning into the moment. They were holding back, watching, measuring, as if they too felt the difference but could not yet name it. A woman near the far side of the pool lowered her glass slowly, her gaze shifting from Daniel to Ava and back again. Her expression no longer entertained, but thoughtful, uncertain. The breeze moved again, brushing lightly across the water, sending small ripples outward that distorted the reflection of the sky and the surrounding architecture, and for a brief second, everything seemed less defined, less certain, as if the entire scene existed between two states, what it had been, and what it was becoming. Ava's fingers moved slightly, not nervously but naturally, a small adjustment that reflected comfort rather than tension, and that subtle movement, almost invisible, carried more weight than any reaction could have, because it confirmed what the room was beginning to understand. She was not affected in the way they expected her to be. She was not shrinking, not reacting, not giving the moment the shape it demanded, and that absence of reaction created something far more powerful than resistance. It created a mirror, one that reflected not her, but him. Daniel's gaze lingered on her longer now, not with curiosity, not even with irritation, but with something closer to confusion, a quiet question forming beneath the surface of his composure, as if he was encountering a response he had never had to process before. "You can step back," Ava said softly, her voice calm, even, without urgency. The words simple, almost gentle, but they did not sound like a request, and they did not sound like fear. They sounded like truth, offered without expectation, without demand, and for a moment, no one spoke, no one moved. The sentence settled into the space like a line drawn across something invisible, and Daniel heard it clearly, but not in the way he heard everything else, not as something to respond to or dismiss, but as something that did not depend on him at all. And that realization, subtle as it was, shifted something again, deeper this time, the kind of shift that could not be undone once it was recognized. The pool reflected the light again, brighter now as the sun lowered slightly, and the edge where he stood seemed sharper, more defined, less forgiving, and for the first time since the moment began, Daniel did not move immediately. He paused, just for a second, just long enough for the silence to take hold fully, just long enough for the room to feel the weight of a moment that no longer belonged to him. Daniel did not like silence when it was not his, and the quiet that settled around him now did not respond to his presence the way it always had. It did not bend, it did not soften, it simply remained, steady and unmoved, and that unfamiliar resistance began to press against something deeper than the moment itself, something tied to who he was in every room he had ever entered, every space he had ever controlled, because control had never been something he questioned. It had been something assumed, something reinforced by years of people reacting exactly as expected, stepping back when he stepped forward, laughing when he spoke lightly, agreeing before disagreement could even form, and that pattern had shaped the way he moved, the way he stood, the way he spoke without needing to raise his voice. But here, now, standing at the edge of a pool that reflected the fading gold of the afternoon, that pattern was not holding, and the break in it was small, almost invisible, but undeniable. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in adjustment, the kind of micro shift that happens when something does not align with expectation. He exhaled slowly, as if resetting the moment, as if choosing to take it back without acknowledging that it had slipped, and then he smiled again, more controlled this time, more deliberate. "You know," he said, turning just enough toward the guests to include them once more. "This is exactly why things get uncomfortable." His tone lighter, almost amused, as if reframing what had just happened into something manageable, something familiar. But the response did not come, not fully. A few people shifted their weight, a faint smile here, a quiet glance there, but nothing solid, nothing that restored the rhythm he relied on, and that absence began to build, not loudly but steadily, Ava remained where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence grounded in a way that did not react to the shift. She did not follow his attempt to redirect the moment, did not reinforce it, did not resist it. She simply existed outside of it, and that separation created a contrast that grew sharper with every second. Daniel's eyes returned to her again, more directly now, less performative, as if trying to understand something that did not fit within the structure he knew. The light shifted slightly as the sun lowered, casting longer shadows across the stone, the edge of the pool now more defined, the reflection of the sky stretching across its surface in soft distortion. And for a moment, everything felt slower, heavier, as if time itself had adjusted to match the weight of the silence. "You think this is about you?" he said, his voice still even, but lower now, less projected, more contained. The words not aimed at the crowd this time, but at her, directly, and yet even in that, there was no aggression, no escalation, only an attempt to regain footing in a space that had quietly shifted away from him. Ava's expression did not change, not because she was resisting, but because there was nothing to resist. Her calm was not built against him, it existed independently, and that independence was what unsettled the moment most, because it could not be influenced, could not be redirected, could not be broken into something more familiar. The guests felt it now, clearly, the change in tone, the shift in control, the subtle movement from performance to something real, and no one interrupted it, no one stepped in, because this was no longer a social moment, it was something else, something that required stillness to unfold. Daniel adjusted his stance again, a small movement, but this time it was not about positioning for the crowd, it was about balance, about grounding himself in a space that no longer felt as certain as it had just moments ago. His shoe pressed against the smooth surface beneath him, the polished stone offering little friction, its beauty now revealing a different quality, something less forgiving, and still, Ava's voice lingered in the air, not loud, not repeated, but present. "You can step back." And for the first time, the meaning of those words reached him not as suggestion, but as possibility, a simple action that carried more weight than anything else in the moment, and yet he did not take it, not immediately, because stepping back meant something more now, something beyond movement, something that touched the very thing he had built himself upon. And in that hesitation, brief but real, the distance between who he had been in that moment and who he was becoming began to widen, quietly, steadily, with no need for anyone to say a word. The pause stretched just long enough to become visible, not as a dramatic break, but as a subtle shift that everyone could feel without fully understanding, and Daniel stood there, caught between the instinct to move and the resistance to what that movement might mean. His weight still near the edge, the smooth stone beneath his shoes reflecting light in a way that made it look almost liquid, almost unstable, and for a brief second, the entire scene seemed to exist on that same surface, polished, controlled, but lacking the grip it needed to hold everything in place. He inhaled slowly, his chest rising just slightly, as if preparing to reset the moment once again. And then he stepped forward instead of back, a small decision, almost unnoticeable, but one that shifted everything further in a direction he did not fully recognize. "You see?" he said, his voice returning with a measured calm, but now carrying a tighter edge beneath it. "This is exactly what I mean." And his hand gestured lightly toward Ava, not aggressively, not forcefully, but with the kind of subtle emphasis that suggested ownership of the situation, as if he could still define it by naming it. The guests watched more closely now, no longer divided between amusement and discomfort, but unified in attention, their silence no longer passive but active, holding the moment in place as it unfolded. Ava did not respond immediately, her eyes remaining steady, her posture unchanged, and the stillness she carried began to contrast even more sharply against the slight movements in Daniel's stance. The way his shoulders adjusted, the way his balance seemed to require more attention than before. The light shifted again, the sun lowering further, creating a longer reflection across the water that stretched toward the edge where he stood. And that reflection moved with every small ripple, distorting, reshaping, never fully still. Daniel's gaze flickered downward for a fraction of a second. Not long enough for most to notice, but enough to reveal that his awareness had shifted, not just to her, but to where he stood, and then it returned to her again, sharper this time, more focused, as if he was trying to anchor himself through eye contact, through control of something that still felt reachable. "You think staying quiet makes you strong?" he continued, his tone even, but now carrying something closer to insistence, as if the words were less about her and more about restoring his own footing. But silence does not change anything. The sentence settled into the air, but it did not land the way he intended. It did not reshape the moment, did not pull it back into something familiar. Instead it seemed to dissolve slightly, absorbed by the same quiet presence that had already altered everything. Ava's expression remained calm. But there was a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible. Her eyes softening just slightly, not in submission, not in agreement, but in understanding, as if she saw something in him that he did not yet see in himself. And when she spoke, her voice was just as quiet as before, steady, grounded, carrying no urgency. "I am not trying to change anything," she said, the words simple, direct, and in their simplicity, they carried a weight that the entire space seemed to recognize. Daniel did not respond immediately, the meaning of her words moving through the silence before reaching him fully, and in that brief delay, something else shifted, deeper now, more permanent, the kind of shift that does not announce itself, it simply redefines what is possible. His foot adjusted again, a slight movement, but this time the surface beneath him did not respond with the same stability it had before. The polished stone offered no resistance, no friction, and the small correction he made did not settle as easily. His body compensating just enough to remain upright, but not enough to feel secure. The guests saw it now, clearly, not as a fall, not as a mistake, but as a change, a subtle loss of certainty that mirrored the shift already unfolding in the space. Chloe, standing just beyond the immediate circle, took a small step forward, her attention sharpened. Her posture no longer relaxed, but attentive, ready, and still Ava did not move. She did not step away, did not step closer. She simply remained, her presence unchanged, her calm not reactive, but constant, and that constancy became the only stable point in a moment where everything else had begun to shift. The water continued to ripple softly, the light continued to move, the air remained still, but the balance of the scene, invisible yet undeniable, had already begun to tilt, and Daniel, standing at the edge, was no longer the one holding it in place. The air tightened without warning, not through sound, not through movement, but through the growing awareness that something had crossed a line no one could clearly define, and Daniel felt it before he understood it. A subtle pressure building beneath the surface of his composure, the kind that does not announce itself but refuses to be ignored. His stance adjusted again, a slight shift of weight that should have been effortless, automatic, but this time it lingered, the correction not settling. As cleanly as before, the smooth stone beneath him catching the fading light, reflecting it in sharp, almost blinding fragments that made the edge harder to read, less certain, and for a brief second, his focus split, not just on Ava, not just on the crowd, but on the ground beneath his own feet, and that division, that small fracture in attention, widened the moment further. "You are making this more than it is," he said, his voice returning, but no longer smooth, no longer carrying the same easy control. It was still calm, still measured, but there was effort now, a subtle strain woven through each word, as if he was holding something in place that no longer wanted to stay. Ava did not answer, her silence no longer empty, but full, holding its own meaning, its own presence, something that did not need to compete with his voice. The guests shifted slightly, and this time it was visible, a quiet murmur passing through them like a ripple. Someone whispered under their breath. Another guest glanced away uncomfortably. A soft, uncertain laugh rose and died almost instantly, as if even that small reaction could not find a place to land. The energy no longer aligned with expectation, no longer safe to treat lightly. Chloe moved another inch closer, her posture attentive, her gaze fixed, not on the performance of the moment, but on the change unfolding within it. The water behind them rippled again, a soft movement that caught the light and broke it into uneven patterns, stretching across the surface like something unstable, something that refused to hold a single shape. Daniel's foot pressed down again, firmer this time, as if trying to reclaim certainty through pressure. But the surface beneath him remained unchanged, smooth, reflective, offering no resistance, and the more he tried to stabilize, the more visible the effort became. His shoulders tightening slightly, his breathing no longer perfectly even, his composure shifting from natural to constructed, and that difference, subtle but undeniable, spread through the space, The crowd felt it, even if they could not explain it. The moment was no longer his to control, it was unfolding on its own terms, and he was inside it, not above it. "Step back," Ava said again, her voice just as quiet, just as steady, but now it carried something else, not urgency, not insistence, but clarity. The kind that arrives when something is already true, whether it is accepted or not. Daniel's eyes locked onto hers, and this time he did not look away quickly. The connection held, longer than before, deeper, and in that space, something shifted again, not outwardly, not visibly, but within the structure of the moment itself. The hierarchy that had defined everything just minutes ago began to dissolve. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but completely. His foot moved again, a small adjustment, but this time it slipped, just slightly, not enough to fall, not enough to break the moment, but enough to reveal what had been building all along. His body reacted instantly, his arm lifting outward, fingers spreading as if reaching for balance that was no longer guaranteed. His other foot compensating, shifting, searching for stability that did not come as easily as it should have. The movement was quick, controlled, but no longer invisible, and the crowd saw it clearly, the first undeniable sign that something had changed. Chloe inhaled softly, her step forward stopping mid-motion, her hand lifting slightly, unsure whether to intervene or to wait. The guests leaned in just enough to signal that they were no longer observers of a social moment, but witnesses to something real, something unplanned, something that could not be reversed by laughter or dismissal. Daniel steadied himself, his posture correcting, but the effort remained visible, his balance no longer something he could take for granted, and in that visibility, in that single moment where control required effort instead of assumption, the entire foundation of his presence shifted. Ava remained still, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, not reacting to his movement, not acknowledging it as victory or failure, just present, just aware, and that lack of reaction, that refusal to define the moment for him, left him standing in something he had never occupied before. A space where power was not given, not taken, but revealed, and in that revelation, quiet and undeniable, the direction of everything that followed had already been decided. The moment slowed, not because anything stopped, but because everything began to separate into smaller pieces, clearer, heavier. The sound of the water became noticeable for the first time. Not loud, not distracting, just present. A soft ripple touching the edge of the pool and returning again, repeating itself with quiet consistency. The light shifted lower across the courtyard, stretching longer shadows across the polished stone, turning reflections into something softer, less sharp, and Daniel stood there, fully upright again, but not the same, his balance restored, but not trusted, his posture aligned, but not effortless, his breathing steadying, but no longer invisible. The space around him no longer reacted to him, it simply existed, and that difference settled deeper than any words could reach. Ava remained where she was, her presence unchanged, but now the stillness around her felt different, not just calm, but grounding, as if everything unstable in the moment quietly leaned toward her without movement, without sound. Chloe's hand lowered slowly, her body relaxing just enough to release the tension she had been holding, her gaze shifting from Daniel to Ava and back again, understanding something she had not expected to see. The guests began to breathe again, small movements returning, a shift of weight, a glass lifted slightly, but no one spoke because the silence no longer needed to be filled. It had already completed something. Daniel looked down briefly, not in defeat, not in avoidance, but in recognition. The edge of the pool now, clearly defined beneath him, the surface smooth, reflective, unchanged, and yet everything about it felt different, as if the ground itself had revealed something it had been holding all along. He adjusted his stance again, this time slowly, deliberately, stepping half an inch back, not enough to draw attention, but enough to create distance, enough to regain something that had been lost, and when he looked up again, his eyes did not search the crowd, did not return to performance. They settled. Somewhere quieter, somewhere more focused. Ava's gaze met his for a moment, steady, open, without demand, and in that brief connection, there was no tension left, no challenge, no need to prove anything, just understanding, simple and complete, the kind that does not need to be spoken to exist. The light touched the water again, softer now, the reflections less intense, more fluid, moving without resistance, and the entire courtyard seemed to follow that shift. the energy loosening, the pressure dissolving. Daniel's shoulders lowered slightly, a small change, almost invisible but real. His hands no longer held tension, no longer positioned for control, just resting at his sides, and for the first time since the moment began, he did not try to redirect it, did not try to shape it. He allowed it to be what it had become. Chloe took a small step back, not retreating, but giving space, recognizing that nothing more needed intervention. The guests began to look at each other. Briefly, not speaking, but acknowledging something shared, something witnessed, something understood without explanation. Ava shifted her weight gently, not away, not toward, just a natural movement, her presence still centered, still grounded, and in that quiet motion, the last trace of tension left the space, leaving behind something else entirely, something calm, something steady, something that did not belong to power or position, but to something deeper, something that had been there from the beginning, waiting for the moment to reveal it. And as the light continued to fade and the air settled into evening, the scene held one final truth, not spoken, not declared, just felt, that nothing had been forced to change, nothing had been taken, and yet everything was different. The quiet did not end, it deepened, as if the moment itself was asking to be felt instead of understood, and Daniel stood there, not moving, not speaking, but no longer the same man who had stepped forward with certainty just minutes before. Something inside him had shifted beyond control, beyond performance, beyond the version of himself he had relied on for years. His gaze rested on Ava again, but this time it did not try to define her, did not measure her, did not place her within any frame. He understood, it simply stayed, and in that stillness, something broke open quietly, not visible to the crowd, not spoken aloud, but undeniable within him. A realization forming not as a thought, but as a feeling he could not escape, that every moment before this, every room he had commanded, every laugh he had drawn, every silence he had controlled, had been built on something fragile, something that required others to respond in order for it to exist. And here, standing in front of someone who did not respond, who did not bend, who did not reflect his expectations back to him, that structure collapsed without resistance, without noise, without warning. His breathing slowed, but not because he chose it, because something inside him needed space to process what he had just seen. The sound of the water returned again, softer, steadier, and it no longer felt like background. It felt like truth, constant, unaffected, real. Chloe watched him closely now, her expression no longer just observant, but aware that something deeper was unfolding, something that could not be interrupted, something that had to complete itself. The guests remained quiet, not because they were waiting, but because they felt it too, the shift from surface to something real, something that could not be undone once recognized. Daniel's shoulders lowered slightly, not in defeat, but in release, the tension he had carried not just in this moment, but in every moment like it, beginning to fall away, piece by piece, and for the first time he saw himself clearly within the space, not as the center, not as the one who defined it, but as someone who had been holding on to something that was never truly his to control. I thought. He began again, but this time the words did not stop because they were incomplete. They stopped because he understood that what he had thought no longer mattered, that the version of reality he had relied on had already changed, and saying it would not restore it, would not rebuild it. Ava remained still, her presence unchanged, but now it carried something else, not just calm, but truth. Something that did not need to be proven because it had already revealed itself. Daniel looked down briefly. The edge of the pool clear beneath him, the same surface, the same reflection, but no longer the same meaning, and in that simple shift of perception, everything connected, the moment, the silence, her stillness, his reaction, all of it forming something complete, something undeniable. He looked back at her, and this time there was no distance, no role, no separation, just clarity, quiet and absolute. "I did not see it," he said. But now the words carried more than acknowledgement. They carried weight, the kind that comes from understanding not just what happened, but what it revealed about himself, and the space received it without reaction, without judgment, because it was no longer about changing the moment, it was about recognizing it. Ava held his gaze for a brief second longer, then lowered her eyes. Slightly, not in submission, not in dismissal, but in completion, as if the moment had reached its natural end without needing to be closed. Chloe exhaled quietly, her posture relaxing fully now, the tension that had once held her dissolving completely. The guests began to move again, softly, slowly, the energy of the space shifting back into something familiar, but not the same, never the same. Daniel remained still, not because he was unable to move, but because he chose not to, standing in the space that had revealed something he could not unsee, something that would follow him long after the moment ended. And Ava, after a quiet pause, turned and stepped away, her movement calm, unhurried, carrying no need to remain, no need to stay within a moment that had already fulfilled its purpose. And as she walked, the light followed her path. Across the stone, leaving behind a space that no longer belonged to control, but to truth, quiet, complete, and irreversible. The space did not rush to fill itself again. It expanded quietly, allowing what had just unfolded to settle into every corner of the courtyard. And Ava's steps moved forward with the same calm rhythm she had carried from the beginning. Not hurried, not delayed, simply steady. Her presence no longer at the center, but still the axis around which everything had shifted. The light followed her movement across the stone, softer now as the sun lowered further, casting a warm glow that stretched her shadow long behind her, and no one stopped her, no one called out, because the moment had already spoken in ways that did not require words. Daniel remained where he was, his posture upright but no longer commanding, his hands resting at his sides without intention, without performance, and his gaze lingered not on the crowd, not on the space he once controlled, but on the path she had taken, as if trying to understand something that could not be reclaimed, only recognized. Chloe stepped closer. To him, not urgently, not with concern, but with quiet presence. Her expression softened, no longer tense, her voice low when she finally spoke. "Are you okay?" And the question did not carry expectation, it simply existed. Daniel nodded slightly, not quickly, not automatically, but with awareness, the kind that comes when an answer is no longer about appearance. "Yes," he said. But the word was different now. It did not assert strength. It acknowledged a moment that had changed something, deeper than he could yet define. The guests began to move more freely, small conversations returning, footsteps soft against the stone, glasses lifted again. But the energy remained altered, no longer centered around him, no longer drawn to his presence as the focal point. Instead it spread outward, more evenly, more naturally, as if the space itself had released something it no longer needed to hold. Ava reached the far side of the courtyard, her figure moving toward the exit, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, and for a brief moment, she paused, not turning fully, but enough that her presence remained connected to the space behind her. Daniel noticed it, that pause, subtle but intentional, and something in him responded, not instinctively, not out of control, but with choice. He took a step forward, not toward the edge, not toward the crowd, but toward her direction. The movement small, measured, and the distance between them remained, but the intention crossed it. "Ava," he said, her name spoken without projection, without authority, simply offered into the space between them. She turned slightly, her gaze meeting his again, steady as before, unchanged, and in that look there was no expectation, no demand, only openness, allowing whatever followed to exist as it was. Daniel held that gaze for a moment, longer than he had ever held anything without trying to shape it, and then he spoke again, slower now, each word carrying weight not from force, but from honesty. "I should not have done that." The sentence simple, unpolished, not constructed for effect, and the space received it quietly, no reaction from the crowd, no interruption, just acknowledgement. Ava listened, her expression softening just slightly, not in approval, not in judgment, but in understanding, and when she responded, her voice remained calm, grounded. "You already know that," she said, and the words did not correct him, did not challenge him. They simply confirmed what he had already begun to see. Daniel nodded once more, this time more certain, not because the moment had returned to him, but because he no longer needed it to. Chloe watched from behind, her expression reflecting something deeper now. Respect, not for status, not for control, but for what had just been revealed. The guests continued their quiet movements, but their attention lingered, not on spectacle, but on meaning. Ava turned fully then, continuing her walk toward the exit, her steps steady, unhurried, leaving the space behind her without attachment, without need, and Daniel remained where he was, not following, not stopping her, simply standing in the space that had been transformed, his gaze no longer searching for control, but resting in something quieter, something more real. And as the light faded further and the evening began to settle over the courtyard, the final shift completed itself, not with sound, not with motion, but with understanding that nothing had been taken from him, nothing had been given to her, and yet everything that mattered had changed, permanently, without force, without resistance, simply because truth had been allowed to exist. The evening settled slowly over the courtyard, not as an ending, but as a quiet continuation of something that no longer needed to be seen to be understood. The golden light that had once stretched sharply across the polished stone now softened into a muted glow, reflections on the water smoothing into calm, uninterrupted lines, and the space that had held tension just moments before now carried something else entirely. Something still, something grounded, something complete. Daniel remained where he stood, his posture no longer shaped by expectation, his presence no longer defined by the need to be noticed, and for the first time in a long while, he did not try to reclaim the center of the room. He did not move to redirect attention. He simply stood, allowing the quiet to exist without filling it. Chloe lingered nearby, not speaking, not interrupting, her presence steady but distant enough to give him space, and the guests, once gathered in tight anticipation, had returned to soft conversations, their voices low, their movements unhurried. But even within that return, there was a difference, a subtle awareness that remained, as if something had shifted not just in the moment, but in the way they saw it. Ava's figure had nearly reached the exit, her steps still measured, still calm, the same rhythm she had carried from the beginning, and as she moved beyond the edge of the courtyard, the light followed her for just a moment longer before fading into the deeper tones of the evening, leaving behind a space that no longer required her presence to hold what she had revealed. Daniel's gaze lingered in that direction, not searching, not calling, just resting, as if the absence itself carried meaning, and slowly, almost without noticing, he exhaled, a longer breath than before, one that seemed to release something he had not realized he was holding. His shoulders settled further, his stance more natural now, not corrected, not adjusted, just real, and he glanced once more at the edge of the pool, the same place where everything had begun, the smooth surface, unchanged, the reflection steady, the water quiet, and yet it no longer felt the same, not because it had changed, but because he had, and that difference, subtle but permanent, stayed with him as he turned slightly, not toward the crowd, not toward the center, but simply toward the space around him. Chloe stepped beside him then, her presence quiet, her expression thoughtful, and though she said nothing, the understanding between them was clear, not spoken, not needed, the kind that exists after something has already been seen. The guests continued their evening, the music faintly returning, the soft clink of glasses blending into the background. But the energy no longer revolved around display or control. It moved more evenly now, more naturally, as if something artificial had been removed, leaving only what was real. And Daniel did not try to step back into who he had been. He did not reach for the version of himself that had stood there earlier, because something in him recognized that it no longer fit, that it had never truly been as stable as it seemed. And in that recognition, quiet and unforced, there was no need for correction, no need for justification, only acceptance, the kind that does not arrive loudly, but remains long after the moment has passed. And as the night fully settled, and the last of the sunlight disappeared from the stone, the courtyard held one final truth, not spoken, not announced, but present in every quiet movement, every softened glance, every steady breath, that power without awareness fades quickly, but dignity, once seen, does not leave, it stays, it lingers, and it changes everything without ever needing to try.